this is your Captain Panic speaking, and welcome back to another Touchdesigner tutorial. This one is part of my Mary Crisis series as well. I spoke more about it in my last tutorial, so this time I will only put the description of Mary Crisis in the video description. And as always, all those project files for this are available on my Patreon. The special thing in December is that the whole Patreon income gets donated for people in crisis. So yeah, if you're watching this in December, sign up and get this project file, and a lot more stuff is on my Patreon too. Yeah, so as the last time, I am doing tutorials of references people sent me on Instagram, and this time I used 2 of the references that got sent to me because I thought it's quite cool to create a morph, because I thought they have kind of the same vibe. So the first one is this broken glass or mirror, I think. Yeah, always looks nice. It's a cool displacement. And then someone sent me this work by Ezra Miller, who's a great artist. Check us out. Yeah, and I thought it's has kind of the same vibe. So I wanted to create a morph of those 2. And what I came up with is this setup. We're using some instancing to create a UV map, which we then use as a displace for an image. And yes, that's it. And now let's dive into it, and I will see you on my screen. All right, welcome on my screen, and let's get started. So the first thing we will do is a constant chop, which we will use for our instancing setup as well as our resolution. So we create 3 channels, and the first one is called res for resolution. The second one is called grid for our instancing grid, and then let's call the third one instances for our amount of instances. So for my setup, I used a resolution of 2000 square pixels, so I'm only having 1 res, and for the grid I went with 12 now, and the instances are 10. All right, so then let's go. So first thing, we will create a UV map. For this I will use a ramp. Then we export our stuff on it. So for this one we use the grid resolution for the instancing setup. Everything else will be the res. So, or not everything else, but everything for our instancing setup will use the grid. Everything for our render setup later will use the res. So make sure you don't confuse those, otherwise your PC might crash. All right. Then we change the pixel format of this ramp to 32-bit float. Otherwise the instancing won't work, because we need a lot of color information. And yes, after the ramp I will create a reorder, and then out of the first ramp I will use another operator, which is a flip, and then we use the bottom left flop into the second input. And then we use the second input for the green information. And since we want a UV map which only consists of red and green, we get rid of the blue by choosing 0 here. All right, cool. And then we will repeat this, but with a different resolution. So let's copy this and just paste it under this. And then for this, I only want this to be some sort of grid. So I only want pixels on this axis. So instead of 12 by 12, I'm going by 12 by 1. And then change the input smoothness to nearest pixel and the viewer smoothness to nearest pixel. So we get 1 pixel per, I don't know, color scale. And then we need to make this square again. So make a fit after this. And then use the 12 by 12 resolution on this again. Then change the input smoothness to nearest pixel and nearest pixel again. You could also select all of those and make it there. So every operator uses nearest pixel. And then in this fit again, we change this to fill, so it gets stretched. So by doing this, we have a grid. A grid view of our UV map. And then for both of those maps, we create a null afterwards, just so we don't confuse them afterwards. So I name this null color. And I name this one position. And once again, change this to nearest pixel so you can see this. And yes, so this will define the color of our instancing setup later, in this one, the position. And right now, all of our instances would be put in a regular grid, which we don't want. We want the instances to kind of be shuffled around, and so we get the nice broken displacement thing. So in between those, I will make a noise, and then I will use the first and the second input, so like this. And then in this noise, I changed the output as input plus noise, that's right. And then we go down with the offset. We go down with the amplitude to 0.01, like this. And everything else, well, I set the period to 2 and the harmonics to 1, and I also changed the seed, but this is stuff that's not really important. The only thing that's important is the offset and the amplitude for now, and you can play with those numbers later. And then after that noise, I will also create a math. Oops, that was a luma level, that's wrong. Math. And then we change the range from 0, 1 to -1 to 1. So yeah, our instances are in between -1 and 1 and not 0 to 1. So it's a little bit cleaner. All right, then let's select all those again and select nearest pixel. And let's move this over so it's sorted again. And then we will need another instancing operator, which will be the scale. So right now we have color, we have the position, and then we also want our instances to have some variation in their size. And for this purpose, I'm just creating a noise. I'm using this, well, we could also do it like this, as the first input for the reference of the size, and otherwise I'm only selecting this as noise. And then for this noise I went with that period by 2, harmonics 0, and everything else stays on default except for nearest pixel, and then for the order of this, make a null again and rename this to scale, and also change it to nearest pixel. Cool. So now we have all our instance operators, and now we will create the geometry we will use as instance. For this I used a sphere, and I changed the detail from 20 rows to 15, and also the columns to 15, so it's not that high res because it doesn't really matter. After this I created a noise. For this noise I went up with the period to 10, 0 harmonics, and everything else on default, except that I don't want it animated right now. I preferred this as a still image, so under the transform I turned this off. I just wanted it to be a little bit irregular and not the full circle sphere. You could also play around a little bit, but I will show you later how this affects our setup. And then after this we need to scale the sphere down a little bit, so I went with a uniform scale by 0.6 because I want it to be evenly scaled. If you want more variation, you can change every axis scale manually. And then after that transform, make a null to group it, and then make a geometry. For this geometry we will need a camera. So cameras are always tricky in Touchdesigner. So I will just tell you my numbers, which I have here, so you don't have to zoom around and get my point of view. So on the translate I went with 0.5, and then I changed the view from perspective to orthographic. And that's it for now. And now let's create our instancing. So under the geo, under the first instance, we turn instancing on, and then we drag in our operators. So first, for the position, we will use our position and drag it into the translate OP. And for X, we go with R, and there we go with G. For this setup, we don't need the blue, so I'm only going with R and G. Perfect. Then second one is the scale. So we use this, drag it on here, and for this let's use our G B. Cool. And then in our instance 2 we drag in the color down here. So color R G B. And now you can see we still have a 3D-ish look on this, which I don't want. So we need to also use a constant mat. So use this and drag it on palm material. And like this, we get a flat texture. Cool. So now we will need a render top, which we then connect to a null, which we make visible in the background. Then for our render top, under the comment tab, let's use a 32-bit float, and also let's use our resolution. Chop the reference, and there we go. So now you can see we have this kind of bullet, broken mirror texture we saw in the beginning. It's a little bit more abstract, but still. And now if I show you what all those parameters do. So if you play around with the scale noise and the seed, you get different scalings. I'm just looking for one that I like. I like this, so I'm staying with this. Okay, and now let's dive into our post stuff, which I used to displace the image actually. So first thing, I created an edge because I only want the edges of this. I changed the strength to 10, and then I comped it again with the green, red, and the UV map. Just make a comp with a multiply, and you're fine. And then let's give us some more space. As always, just in case I want to insert something here quickly, I make a null, because now we head into a feedback loop. So for this, after this null, I make a comp, set the operation mode to over, make a feedback out of the first null. Where is it? There. Then make a keyboard in chop, export the key on the pulse so we can reset this easily. And then let's make a level, put it over here because we will insert some stuff later. And then put this level into the comp, change the opacity of the level to 0.99. And then we would drag this comp onto the feedback. I am doing this a little bit more quickly because most of my tutorials consist of those kind of feedback loops, always the same. Yeah, so sorry if I went too quick, but yeah, it should be a little bit familiar. Okay, so now let's insert some more operators in this feedback loop, because right now nothing is happening. So first thing I want is a displace. For this displace, I went with a weight of 0.014 on both axes, and I displaced it with itself but using a slope. So make a slope out of the feedback, and for this slope I went with a strength of 0.5 and a sample step of 0.5. Then drag it in here. Now you can already see what's happening. So it kind of pushes the edges. So it gets a little bit 3D-ish and gives the whole thing more depth. And just because I don't like those ripples here, which you can see, I made a blur after this with a filter size of 2, so it's just slightly blurred. All right. So that's it for the feedback loop. And after this, we will comp this with a UV map again. So remember, we made one already, so we just copy this again. And let's place it here for now, because for this UV map, which we will use in our render setup, we need to use our resolution, because right now we're only using 12 by 12, and for this we will need our render resolution. So just chop the reference and then use this and drag it all the way over here. And then we will comp those two together. Use a comp. And I went with add for this. Then after this, we will use a limit. Where is it? There it is. We will turn on normalizing, which normalizes our pixel values again. So right now we have 0, -1 to 1, I think, and I only want the pixels to be positive. I'm not sure if this is the correct explanation. I'm not really good at this kind of stuff. I just used it because it looked better. If you want to know everything behind this, you should check out Paketa12. He does a lot of stuff with limit and also UV maps. So for the more scientific approach, head over there. It's not my special ability. I'm just here for the looks. Okay, cool. So after this limit, I created a slope. For this slope, I went with a strength of 42. Can already see what this does. And then we need to bring in our image we want to displace now. I am using this image of a butterfly I found on Unsplash by David Clody, I don't know how it's spelled. Really nice and pretty image of a butterfly. Yes, then as you can see, this is not a square resolution and I'm using a square resolution here, so I will bring in a fit and head into the comment tab, go over to our constant again and use our render resolution. Also, I am going with the same pixel format I used everywhere else, 32-bit float. And then in the fit, instead of fit best, I went to fit outside because I don't want it to be transparent on the edges. All right, so now let's create a displace after the slope. But instead we use our image as the first input and this one as the second input. And now it gets a little bit wild because our displace weight is a little bit high right now. So go down with this to 0.1, which is a nice number, I think, but yeah, just use what you prefer. Cool. So basically, we could call it a day now, but let's bring in some details, because details are always the things that are the nicest about art. That was a little bit cringe, so let's forget about what I just said and let's bring in some details without making it too special. So first thing, I want this to have some more details, and that includes having a variety of sharpness. So right now everything is quite sharp, and I want to have some blurred areas which are a little bit more smooth and abstract. So for this purpose, we are creating a Luma blur. A Luma blur, instead of a normal blur, decides to blur like either the black color of the image or the white color, so you have more variety in your blur filters. And for this, we are using a noise, and we want our image to be the reference of where the blurred areas are and where they aren't. So we are using this limit as the second input for this noise, and also the first input, and then change the output to noise. And then just plug it into the second input. I left everything on default for this noise. And then in this Luma blur, I chose to blur the white by 24. Oops. Now I crashed it. I'm sorry. I will pause it for now because I just broke my entire PC. Okay, now we're back. Just type in 24 and not a really high number, because you just saw what happens if you do that. And you could also go a little bit higher if you like. Maybe let's go by this. This is actually even more nice. And then another thing I kind of liked is, because sometimes if you look through glass and something is displaced behind it and the glass is a little bit grainy, I really enjoy that, because it gives the whole thing a more interesting look. So we want to bring in some grain after this slope which displaces the image. And instead of the simplex noise type, we just choose random. Then we go down with the offset and also the amplitude, and go with something really small. Maybe 0.02 is nice. So now our glass is grainy, but now it's grainy everywhere, and I don't want it to be everywhere. So I created a matte. So we can use our smooth glass and our grainy glass in one morph. So we use the noise as the first, this one as the second, and then we will use a noise like this as our mask. So let's copy this noise, bring it over here, use it at this as this third input, change the matte channel to luminance, and then basically play with this. So you can see what it does, and you play around with it. So I won't tell you how I went. I just went crazy with it and found something cool. So yeah, it gives a little bit more detail to this whole thing. It abstracts it more, which I always like. And yeah, now we are done with the tutorial. Of course, you could also use this this setup in an abstract way. You could just, I don't know, just displace a noise, which is maybe more like the Ezra Miller thing I showed in the beginning. If you use just gradients or a noise pattern or any abstract thing. I always prefer to abstract images, but that's up to you. And you will find your way. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. There will be 2 more tutorials coming this month, also chosen by references of you. And I can't wait to show you more. So stay creative, stay kind, and bye-bye.